A work of my own. After leaving my great uncle's, I found myself working at a small eating place in Hibiya. It was known as the Socialist Odin's because the owner was sympathetic to socialism. He seemed, in fact, to be a socialist himself. The place attracted people of an intellectual bent like journalists, socialists, office workers, writers, and the like. I waited on customers here during the day and went to school at night, the agreement being that the shop would pay my school fees and train fare. Up to this time, I had been attending day school, but I now switched to night classes, where I made friends with a woman by the name of Niyama Hatsuyo. Hatsuyo is probably the only woman of her sort that I will come across in my lifetime. How many things I learned from her. But it is not only what she taught me. Thanks to Hatsuyo, I gained the warmth and strength of true friendship. After Park and I were arrested, one of the people at police headquarters evidently asked Hatsuyo who her closest woman friend was. Without a moment's hesitation, it seems, she gave my name. She was certainly my closest friend, too. Hatsuyo, however, is no longer of this world. Oh, how I would like to reach out my hand to her right now, but I know there is no one there any longer to take it. Hatsuyo was 2 years older than I, just 21 at the time. She was extremely intelligent and had what you might call, in the good sense of the word, a masculine personality. She was strong-willed and did not let herself be ruled by those around her. She was a woman who had the strength to stick to her guns. Hatsuyo's family was not well off, but neither was it lumpen proletariat like my own. Which is not to say that she had an easy time of it. Her father had been a heavy drinker and had neglected his children. He died when Hatsuyo was in her second year at women's high school. Not long after that, she came down with a lung ailment and had to go to her hometown in Niigata to recuperate. At this time, it seems, troubled by the problem of death, she began studying Buddhism. Her illness was not too serious, however, and she came back to Tokyo to graduate with honours from either the No. 2 or No. 3 high school. People realised her potential and urged her to go on for higher education, but with her father dead, her mother had her hands full just trying to raise Hatsuyo's younger sister. Hatsuyo would not think of adding to her mother's burden, and instead of continuing her education, she set about looking for a means to support herself. She attended typing school, became a typist, and went to work as a clerk in a company run at the time by an Englishman. At night, she attended seisoku to improve her English. I do not remember exactly how I became friends with Hatsuyo. Hearing this, I vividly recalled the feelings I had experienced the time in Korea that I had determined to die. I joined the conversation to say that, based on my own experience, I thought Hatsuyo's view was mistaken. I don't agree with you. I can state from my own experience that what people fear in death is the loneliness of having to leave this world forever. Though people may not be consciously aware of all the phenomena around them under normal circumstances, the thought that that which makes themselves will be lost forever is a terribly lonely thing. In sleep, that which is ourselves is not lost, merely forgotten. I do not, of course, think that either of our positions was entirely correct, but this discussion provided the occasion for the two of us to start talking to each other. Have you actually faced death? Hatsuyo asked me. Yes, I have, I answered. The two of us continued the conversation on the way home after school let out. We were soon good friends. In retrospect, I believe I was influenced not so much by Hatsuyo herself, as by what I read in the books that I got from her. I had always wanted to read books, but had been unable to afford them. But when I became friends with Hatsuyo, I borrowed and read almost all of her books. It was she who lent me Worker Sergiev, a book that impressed me very much. She had also lent me Night Before Death, and had told me of the thought of, or at least the names of, Bergson, Spencer, and Hegel. The books she introduced me to that had the greatest influence on my thought were those of the nihilists. It was at this time that I learned of people like Stirner, Artzybashev, and Nietzsche. It was getting on evening, and the leaden sky portended imminent rain, if not snow. I left the Odin shop at 4 o'clock, but as there were still 2 hours before classes began, I went over to see a friend of Hayon's who lived in a lodging house near school. Come in, Jeong said, as soon as he saw me. I've been waiting for you to come. I've got something nice for you. He took a letter out of his desk drawer and handed it to me. The letter was from Hayon, and part of it was addressed to me. It said that he had received a telegram that his mother was in a critical condition, and he had to leave for home in a great hurry. He apologized for not being able to say goodbye. This was a complete lie, however. He had decided some time ago to go home. I flung the letter aside with a shrug, not even particularly angry. Jeong had nothing to say on the matter either. He seemed, in fact, to have been just waiting for me to finish so that he could show me 3 or 4 pages of galley proof, which he now took out. They were from an 8-page octavo monthly that he was going to publish, a project that he had spoken to me about before. "Oh, it's out already," I exclaimed, eager to share in Jeong's excitement. The contents, however, turned out to be things that had been written some time back, all of which I had read in manuscript. But there was one item that caught my eye. It was a short poem in a corner of the last page. Oh, what a powerful poem it was. Every single phrase gripped me. By the time I finished, I was practically in raptures. My heart leapt in my breast, and I felt as though my very existence had been elevated to new heights. I was not familiar with the author's name, Pak Yal, and thought at first that it might be a pen name. But no, the person who had written this poem could not be one of the Koreans whom I knew. "Who is this Pak Yal?" I asked. "Him? Oh, he's a friend of mine," Jeong replied offhandedly. "He's not very well known yet though, quite a poor guy." "Oh? But this man has great strength. I've never seen a poem quite like this." If Jeong did not have the wits to recognize the author's worth, I certainly did. My reaction did not please him very much though. "What's so good about it?" "It's not any one thing in particular. It's the poem as a whole. It's more than good, it's powerful. I feel like I've just discovered here in this poem something I've been searching for." "Got really carried away, didn't you? Would you like to meet the author?" "I sure would. Seriously, introduce me, will you?" At that point, I became aware of the gentle sound of a light, powdery snow falling outside. The clock in the hall downstairs struck 6 o'clock, and the boisterous voices of students trooping down the stairs could be heard. "Hey, don't you have to go to school?" Jeong reminded me. "School?" I answered indifferently. "Who cares about school?" "What do you mean?" Jeong looked puzzled. I thought you were the struggling student, slaving away to put yourself through school. I was. In the beginning, I was so full of enthusiasm that I wouldn't have missed a day, even if it meant going without meals, but not anymore. What happened? Oh, nothing special. I'm just no longer interested in trying to get ahead in this world. What? But if you quit school, what are you going to do? That's the question. It's been on my mind a lot. I want to do something, but I don't know what. I'm sure, though, that it's not slaving to put myself through school. I believe that there is something that I must do, that I have to do, no matter what, and I'm trying to discover what that something is. Although I had once pinned all my hopes on putting myself through school, believing that I could thereby make something of myself, I now realized the futility of this all too clearly. No amount of struggling for an education is going to help one get ahead in this world. And what does it mean to get ahead anyway? Is there any more worthless lot than the so-called great people of this world? What is so admirable about being looked up to by others? I do not live for others. What I had to achieve was my own freedom, my own satisfaction. I had to be myself. I had been the slave of too many people, the plaything of too many men. I had never lived for myself. I had to do my own work. But what was it? I wanted so badly to find it, and to set about accomplishing it. It was no doubt Hatsuyo who influenced me to think this way. Besides the stimulus of the books that she let me read, there was the example of Hatsuyo herself and her lifestyle. But whatever their source, such thoughts had preoccupied me for some time. "You're right," Jiong said in complete agreement. "I'm sure, too, that we all have something before us that we must do." We went on to talk about a variety of things with a seriousness we had never had before. Then, remembering that there was a lecture that night on socialist thought at Seinen Kaikan in Mitsushiro-cho, I bade farewell to Jiong and went to school to invite Hatsuyo to the lecture. The two of us left school and walked through streets covered with snow. I was gradually beginning to understand how society works. Up until then, the true shape of reality had been thinly veiled, but now it all began to become clear. I understood why someone poor like myself could never study and get ahead in this world. Why, too, the rich got richer and the powerful were able to do anything they liked. I knew that what socialism preached was true, but I could not accept socialist thought in its entirety. Socialism seeks to change society for the sake of the oppressed masses, but is what it would accomplish truly for their welfare? Socialism would create a social upheaval for the masses, and the masses would stake their lives in the struggle together with those who had risen up on their behalf. But what would the ensuing change mean for them? Power would be in the hands of the leaders, and the order of the new society would be based on that power. The masses would become slaves all over again to that power. What is revolution then, but the replacing of one power with another? Hatsuyo ridiculed the movements of people like the socialists, or at best viewed them coolly. "I can't," she said, "hold a fixed philosophy about human society. What I do is gather people around me who feel like I do and live the kind of life that feels right. That is the kind of life that is most realistic and has the greatest meaning." One member of our group called that view escapism, but I did not agree. I too believed it was impossible to change the existing society into one that would be for the benefit of all. Neither could I espouse any given ideal for society, but in one thing I differed from Hatsuyo. I felt that, even if one did not have an ideal vision of society, one could have one's work to do. Whether it was successful or not was not our concern. It was enough that we believed it to be a valid work. The accomplishment of that work, I believed, was what our real life was about. Yes, I want to carry out a work of my own, for I feel that by so doing our lives are rooted in the here and now, not in some far-off ideal goal. One bitterly cold night, I skipped my English conversation class to go to Jeong's, something I often did. I opened the sliding door to his room unannounced, as was also my wont, and called out a greeting. Jeong was sitting by the hibachi with a man I did not know. The two of them were discussing something in low tones. The stranger, who looked about 23 or 24, was of medium height, slender, and had thick, jet-black hair that fell loosely down to his shoulders. He was wearing blue duck-cloth workman's clothes and a brown overcoat, the buttons of which were hanging down by the threads in imminent danger of falling off. The sleeves of the coat were worn at the elbows, and the knees of the man's trousers were so threadbare that they had gaping holes. "Come in," Jeong called out in welcome. The stranger gave me the briefest glance, then clammed up and directed his gaze at the smouldering coals. "It's really cold, isn't it?" I said, as I swept into the room and seated myself by the hibachi. "I haven't seen you for days. Did something come up?" Jeong asked. "No, nothing special," I answered, then addressed a few words to the stranger. "I'm sure I saw you standing by the stage the other day at the Russian famine relief concert at Chukasainen Kaikan. You were there, weren't you?" "Oh, was I?" he said, then quickly rose to his feet. "Oh, you don't have to go," I said hurriedly to stop him. "Go on with your conversation. I didn't come for anything in particular." The guest made no response. He merely stood there looking down coldly at me under thick eyebrows through his black, horn-rimmed spectacles. His presence was overpowering. He then bid us an abrupt goodbye and left. "Hey!" Jeong yelled, jumping to his feet and running out to the hall after the stranger. "Where are you going to stay tonight? You can stay with me, you know." "Thank you. But I'm going to stay at a friend's in Komagome tonight," he said with a hint of sad resignation. I felt very small, like I had done something wrong. "Jeong, what's that man's name?" "Him, that's Pak Yeol, the author of that poem you got so excited about." "What? That man is Pak Yeol," I exclaimed, blushing. "Yes, that's the man," Jeong calmly replied. I asked all sorts of questions about Pak Yeol and learned that he had been a rickshaw man, ticket scalper, mailman, longshoreman, and many other things as well. He had no job at present, however, and slept at a different friend's home every night. "Why, he lives just like a stray dog. Where does he get that powerful presence then? He carries himself as if he were a king." "All the while, going around like that, living off his friends, eh?" Jeong said with a touch of contempt. When he saw my displeasure, however, he added, "But he really is something, that man. How many of us think as seriously and act with as much conviction as he does?" "Oh, how right you are," my heart cried out. Something was stirring within me, about to be born. What was at work within this man? What was it that made him so strong? I wanted to find out and make it my own. I left Jeong to go back to the shop, and on the way it dawned on me. That's it. That's what I'm looking for. The work that I want to do, he has it within him. He is what I'm looking for. He has my work. A strange joy set my heart leaping. I was so excited that I could not sleep that night. Early the next morning, I went to see Jong to tell him that I wanted to get to know Pak and to ask him to introduce us. But he's always drifting. It's hard to get hold of him when you want, Jong said. That's all right. Just tell him to come to my shop. All you have to do is pass that message on to him. Jong agreed to help, but Pak did not come. After 4 or 5 days, I went to see Jong again. Did you tell him? Yes, I saw him at a meeting 2 or 3 days ago and told him. What did he say? Nothing much, really. He just said, I see. He didn't seem very interested. I was somewhat discouraged. Perhaps he could not be bothered with somebody like me. But I did not give up. And I waited for the day when he would show up. 10 days passed, however, then 20, and Pak still did not come to see me. By now, I was desolate. His failure to come seemed to get the seal on my worthlessness. I even made a decision to get myself a profession, become a typist like Hatsuyo perhaps, so that I could live on my own. Then, about a month after I had asked Jong to convey my message, I think it was the 5th or 6th of March, Pak turned up at the shop. The sight of him set my heart pounding. Oh, you finally came, I said quietly, leaving the 2 groups of customers I had been waiting on to show Pak to a table in the corner. This is perfect. Wait for me a little while, and I'll leave with you. I brought Pak some rice, stewed daikon, and tofu. When it was at last time for me to go to school, I went upstairs to get my things together. I had asked Pak to leave the shop a little ahead of me, and now I went out with my school bag on my arm, as I always did. Pak was waiting for me outside, and we set out together for the street where the train passed. When we got there, however, Pak stopped short. You're going to Kanda, aren't you? I have something to do in Kayobashi, so I'll say goodbye here. He started walking off at a brisk pace. Wait a minute, I said, running after him. Come again tomorrow, I'll have something nice for you. Thank you, I will. Then he was gone, leaving me feeling frustrated. He came to the shop around noon the next day. I sat down beside his table and said in a low voice, so that the other customers could not hear, Would you meet me in front of school tonight? There's something I want to talk to you about. What school do you go to? Kanda Saisoku. All right, I'll be there. I felt assured at last, and waited for evening to come. Sure enough, he was there just as he had promised, standing beneath the bare trees in front of school. Thank you. Have you been waiting long? No, I just got here. Oh, did you? Thank you. Shall we walk a bit? We chose a place where there were few people. We did not speak, however. What I wanted to talk about was not the sort of small talk you make on the street. I was looking for a place that would be quieter and more relaxed. When we came to Jimbo-chu Avenue, I saw a large Chinese restaurant. Let's go in here, I said, and strode up the steps. Pak followed me without a word. We sat down in a small room on the 3rd floor, and the boy brought tea. I asked him to bring 2 or 3 dishes, leaving the choice up to him. When the boy had left, I lifted the lid from the teacup. Do you know how you're supposed to drink this tea? If you drink it with the lid off, it seems like the tea leaves will get in your mouth, but it seems funny to drink it with the lid on. How are you supposed to drink it? I've never been in a fancy place like this, so I don't know, he said, taking the lid off, then replacing it as I had done. But it's a drink, so I suppose any way that you can get it down will be all right. Surely there isn't a rule about it, is there? He tilted the lid slightly and drank at the opening. Oh, I see. That must be the way to do it, I said as I followed suit. The tea was not very good. We ate the food as the boy brought it. I was not making much headway with the meal, but Pak ate as if he were ravenous. I wanted to get onto the topic I had come to talk about, but the atmosphere was stiff and it was hard to speak. Finally, however, I made an awkward beginning. Well, I think you probably heard from Jong that I wanted to be friends with you. Yes, he did say something about that. Pak lifted his gaze from his plate and looked at me. Our eyes met. I felt acutely embarrassed, but having reached this point, there was nothing to do but come out with what was on my mind. I went on. Well, I'll get right to the point. Do you have a wife? Or, well, if not exactly a wife, someone like, say, a lover? Because if you do, I want our relationship to be just one between comrades. Well, do you? What a clumsy proposal. What a comical scene. When I think back on it now, it makes me blush and want to burst out laughing. But I was dead serious at the time. I'm single. I see. Then, what I want to ask you, I hope we can talk absolutely frankly with each other, of course. Well, then, you see, I'm Japanese, but I think I can say that I'm not prejudiced against Koreans. I wonder, though, if you have any feelings against me. Knowing how Koreans felt about Japanese, I thought that it was necessary to ask this straight off. I was afraid of the emotions that Pak might harbour as a Korean. No, it's not ordinary people that I hate. It's the Japanese ruling class. And I even feel a bond with people like you who aren't prejudiced. Really? Thank you, I smiled with relief. But there's something else I want to ask. Are you working in the nationalist movement? You see, I lived for quite a while in Korea, and I think I understand how the nationalists feel. But I myself am not Korean. I haven't suffered the kind of oppression by Japan that Koreans have. And I don't feel I can work in the independence movement with those people. So, if you are in the independence movement, I'm sorry, but I can't work with you. There are points where I sympathise with the independence movement people, Pak said. I myself tried to participate in the nationalist movement at one time, but not now. Are you completely opposed to the nationalist movement then? Not at all, but I have my own way of thinking and my own work to do. I can't participate in the nationalist front. I felt tremendously relieved. There was nothing in the way now. Yet I still did not feel that the moment had come to bring up the main point. We made small talk once again. I sensed more than ever a strength in him, and I felt myself being more and more deeply attracted. At last, I broached the subject. I found what I've been looking for in you. I want to work with you. It's no good, Pak said in a chilling tone. I go on living only because I don't seem to be able to die. It must have been close to 8 o'clock by then. We agreed to meet again and asked the boy for the check. It came to 3 yen. I'll pay. I have some money today, Pak said as he emptied the outer pockets of his overcoat. They contained 3 or 4 golden baht cigarettes, a couple of rumpled bills, and 7 or 8 copper and silver coins. I stopped him. No, I'll pay. I think I'm richer than you are. We left the restaurant together. We saw each other often after that, and could speak without any awkwardness. We were at ease because our hearts were one. At last we reached a final understanding. The matter was settled in the upstairs of a small restaurant in Misaki-cho. We finished at around 7 o'clock. It was too late for me to go to school and too early to go home, so we strolled beside the dark moat in the direction of Hibiya. The night was still cold, and we clasped hands in the pocket of Pak's overcoat, letting our feet take us where they would. There was not a soul in the park. The stillness of the night was broken only by the feeble echo of a distant train. The only light was the silent glistening of the stars in the sky above and the arc lamps on the earth below. Pak spoke with uncommon animation. He said that he had been born in a rural area in Gyeongsang-bu-do. He came from a commoner family that had been peasants for generations, although there had been a number of scholars and persons in high social positions among his forebears. Pak's father died when he was 4 years old. His mother was an extremely gentle woman, and the young Pak clung to her to the extent that he could not sleep at night if their legs were not first tied together. Pak went to the village temple school when he was 7, and then to the regular school that was built in the village when he was 9. An unusually bright student, he wanted to go on with his studies, but the family's fortunes declined at that time, and Pak's older brother decided that Pak would work on the farm. This he did until he was 15, when, unable to suppress his desire to study, he ran away to Taegu and took the exam for regular high school. He passed with such a high score that his brother gave in and, although it was hard for the family, sent him his school expenses. Pak took correspondence courses from Waseda University from about that time and read works by Japanese writers. His thinking began to move steadily to the left. It was about that time that he decided to join the independence movement. He quickly realized its falseness, however. As Pak saw it, even if the rulers changed, this would mean little as far as the people were concerned. Then, in the spring of his 17th year, he came to Tokyo. Pak's life after coming to Tokyo was one long, bitter struggle, and he became increasingly closed in on himself. He had by now lost interest in movements dependent on the pen or the tongue, and was determined to forge a path by himself. Pak did not tell me all of this at one time. In fact, he is not a man to talk a lot about himself. He told me only fragments, and I put the fragments together from what other people later told me. It was of the future, not the past, that we mostly talked. We cherished vague hopes and spoke of the tasks that lay before us. Then Pak brought up something that had been on his mind. "Fumiko, I want to move into a flophouse to do serious movement work. What do you think?" "A flophouse? I think it's a good idea. But it would be filthy, you know. There would be bed bugs and things. Do you think I could put up with it?" "I think I can. If you can't put up with little things like that, you might as well not try anything in the first place." "Of course, you're right." After a brief pause, Pak began again. "Fumiko, they say that the bourgeoisie go on honeymoons when they get married. But how about us commemorating our living together by putting out a secret publication?" "That sounds interesting. Let's," I said, without giving it much thought. "What shall we publish? I have the Conquest of Bread. We could translate that." "That's already been translated. And besides, I don't want to put out anything by others. It's better if the two of us write something ourselves, even if it isn't so great." We became completely wrapped up in planning this venture, and before we knew it, we were out of the park and on the busy street. It seemed to have gotten rather late. "I wonder what time it is. I have to go home at 9 o'clock, I said reluctantly. "I don't know, but wait here, I'll go and see." Pak went over to look at the clock at the police box in front of the trolley intersection. Neither of us had ever owned a watch. "It's 17 minutes to 9, he said when he returned. "Oh, then I'll have to be going home." "You can stay another 30 minutes, can't you? After all, school lets out at 9, And then it takes you 10 minutes on the train, right? So you've still got 25 or 30 minutes. Thank you, sir. What would I do without you? We held hands again and went back into the park, found a bench under some trees and sat there, perfectly still, our frozen cheeks pressed together until it was time to leave. We got up reluctantly and made for the park exit. At last, I broke the silence. Where will you be spending the night? Pak thought for a while, then said in a melancholy voice, I guess I'll go to a friend's house in Kojimichi. Well, that's fine, but aren't you lonely like this with no home? Sure, I'm lonely, Pak murmured, not taking his eyes off the ground. It's all right when you're well, but when you're sick, even people who are normally kind don't want to be bothered at times like that. That's true. People can be cold, can't they? You're a little thin, but have you been seriously ill? I mean, since coming to Tokyo? Yes. Last spring, I had a bad case of flu, and no one to look after me. I spent 3 days in a flophouse in Honjo, not eating or drinking, just lying there moaning. I was afraid I would die like that. I was overcome by emotion, and my eyes filled with tears. I squeezed Pak's hand. If only I had known. Soon, however, Pak said in a perfectly composed voice, Well, goodbye, be seeing you. He dropped my hand and jumped on a car for Kanda. I prayed in my heart as I watched him go. Please wait. It won't be long. We'll be together just as soon as I finish school, and then I'll always be with you. I'll never let you suffer from sickness or things like that. If you die, I'll die with you. We'll live together, and we'll die together. Afterword. I end the account of my life here. I am not free to record anything of what happened after this except for my life together with Pak. But in writing this much, I have accomplished my purpose. What made me the way I am? I have nothing more to say on this. It is enough that I have laid out my whole life here. The reader with feeling will, I believe, understand well enough from this record. My presence will shortly be effaced from this earth. I believe, however, that every phenomenon continues as such to exist in eternal actuality, even though it be physically obliterated. I now lay down the pen with which I have written this clumsy account, perfectly calm and at peace. A blessing on all those whom I love.